Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. Joining me, as always, is my partner in crime, Tony Tresselt.
Morning, everyone.
Hey, Tony. And joining us from the great state of Ohio, the flyover state, as Tony calls it, Brian Goodall. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited, nervous, and all the things. So hopefully we can make something out of this, not wasting your guys' time.
Right on. Well, when you start off with an honest statement about how you feel, that's usually a really good indicator of things with anybody. Well, I think we've been pretty well consistent with starting our podcast off the same way with everyone, and that is with the simple question. I need to get better at making my questions simple. So here it is, my attempt today at a simple question. Can you remember or think back to your first experience or memory where you felt the connection to a tree or trees?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think oftentimes when I try to look back and think about what would have led me into this or where my interest may have started, and I think for me, a big part of that was just the simple climbing trees as a kid in either my mom's backyard or my grandparents' backyard. Mm-hmm. My grandparents had these two massive silver maples that were, spready right from like 3 feet off the ground. So it was real easy as a kid to climb up into that first crotch and climb around in there. And those trees are still around. And my mom's house, the same thing. I have fond memories of I would climb up into a tree and hide, and then I would tease my grandma who lived with us at the time, tease her from the tree. I'd call her name and she wouldn't know where I was, and I'd keep yelling her name until she finally would see me, and then I'd get yelled at for teasing her. But that's, to me, I think that's kind of what, looking back, that's kind of where my interest lied. I just always loved trees. I love the outdoors, and I love climbing trees, and it just seemed like a natural fit.
If you think back to your tricking your grandma, do you think she knew and just played along?
Probably. But at the same time, though, she was also pretty gullible. So
right, okay, yeah. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, exactly.
So what kind of tree was it?
So at my grandparents, my one set of grandparents' house, there were silver maples, real big, massive silver maples, and then at my mom's house, the ones I would climb on, there was a lot of maples. I mean, in that part of Ohio, it's pretty much all maple. You have a ton of oak or other variety of deciduous trees in there, especially in yard trees. Right. But, we had some pines and some spruce in the yard as well. But yeah, most of the trees I was climbing up in were some form of maple, whether it had been sugar, silver, or red. Did have some big tulip poplars, but.
Oh yeah. Well, they always get big. They're kind of like the eucalyptus of the East, eh? The tulip poplar.
Yeah, big old trees.
Except I think they're actually native. They're not introduced, the tulip poplar.
Yeah.
I find it interesting always listening to arborists or tree people talk about trees from their youth because we use the names of them. When I think back, I spent a lot of time in trees. And I had no idea what they were even called. I knew they were trees. That's about it. I didn't know that for me, the farm was surrounded by Carigana and a Manitoba maple shelter belt with some poplars mixed in. And it was like a 3-layer classic prairie design, where it was designed to. But it was years later before I realized, thinking back on it now, I know what trees they are and their characteristics and so on. It's interesting because a lot of people can't do that. They'll live their lives talking about trees as trees.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that was definitely one thing I recognized when I started getting into like the actual field and like learning from people who knew what they were looking at is like, I knew maples. Like I could tell you they were a maple tree, but what kind of maple tree I didn't know.
Yeah.
and and same thing like that. So that I remember when I started learning the types of trees, thinking about what I grew up with around home because I never really paid attention before, and it was kind of that eye opening moment of like, man, I thought I knew some stuff, but I guess I really didn't.
Yeah, it's there's some type of fascination. Well, at least for me, I found a real fascination with people that knew the names of different trees. It was
Yeah,
like this secret art, because I think it is, even today it's relatively rare. If you look at the amount of people that actually can identify trees versus those that can't, it's pretty. We're in a pretty small group, and we
yeah,
take it for granted, I think now. But I don't know, was it like that for you? Like there was that part of
yeah.
your attraction to the industry?
Yeah, definitely. Like I think back to like some of the guys that I consider like my mentors or people that I like wanted to emulate or be like, and they were always the guys that they knew what every tree species was or every plant species was. They could tell you everything about it. And I had this one guy in particular that we'd walk in the woods together and he would just point at things and say, "What's that? What's that? What's that?" And I remember I would get almost everything wrong, or I wouldn't know on almost everything. And then once I would get one right or two right, and then
Yeah.
I felt so proud that I was finally getting something right. And now it's kind of come full circle to where I'm kind of that way now, where I'm the guy that's like pointing stuff out to people and asking them what it is.
Yeah.
And it still surprises me too. A lot of people that I work with and know, like it does surprise me sometimes the lack of people's tree identification abilities, even when they've
Mm.
been doing it for so long. You think people might know a little bit more than they do.
It was a great debate when I was on test committee, or no, I think I was on cert board with ISA when they went through the process of deciding to eliminate the sample
Yeah, ID.
process for ID, and it went to just slides, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
lamented to this day, some people think it's the direct cause of the state of degradation of identification.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
reason they did it, I remember the reason it needed to be done was for them to get their national credentialing for certification as a certification. So to get their certification to be a certification, they needed to fill all the holes in where there could be quality control issues, and because they couldn't control how the samples were collected, and the type of
Right,
samples and the quality of the samples, because depending on who was cutting them, like, because you'll get guys, they'll just cut a twig. You didn't know
right,
that. If they're
right,
certified arborists, they should be able to identify from just a twig.
right,
And
right.
so it was for that reason that they had to go with slides. It made sense, but at the same time, I was on you know, I remember an instructor, and this is funny, when you were talking about guys pointing and saying, "What's that?" He would say, "You'll be able to identify any tree 60 miles an hour through a dirty windshield."
Yeah, the highway
Yeah,
identification.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah. And
yep.
it's funny, it's kind of true. Like you just look and go, "Oh yeah, that's that, that's that, that's that."
Yeah. Do you find yourself doing that just wherever you go,
Oh
or
yeah,
even when you're driving or otherwise? I talk to people a lot about distracted driving, but I'm always identifying trees while I'm driving.
yeah. I think any arbor or family of any arborist, gets the eye roll and is like, "Oh great." That tree needs that. That tree, look at that tree. Whoa, that tree's in decline. That tree's going to fail. Oh, that tree. Plus what it is,
Yeah,
You know what that is, don't you know what it is?
yeah. I,
I'm
I tend to
curious.
keep that to myself.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I've
yeah.
learned.
Tony, I'm curious. I was thinking as we were talking about this, you were raised a little like with tree people kind of around you a little bit. Your dad was in the biz. So did you always kind of know what the trees were then? Just intuit, like, because of pop?
Yeah, because my dad would never like just say, "Hey, go over there by that tree." It was always like, "Go over there by that, that red maple," or "Go over there by," because he had a
Right.
Yeah,
forestry background. What I never really, I learned a lot of common names. I
Ah.
never learned, the scientific names until later, right? But it's always been like, yeah, just go over there by that red oak. It's not
Yeah.
just go over there by that big tree, or by that hemlock. So I've never known and my dad was heavily involved, not only forestry and arboriculture as a living, but then he loved Boy Scouting. So he got me and my brothers involved in it. So then, that became another conduit to start to learn about, trees and stuff. But I always had a bit of a leg up because it was never just that big tree over there. It was specific. It was silver maple. It was spruce. It was what it really was. So I never realized what kind of a gift that was actually until right about now, right? Because it's just always been that way.
Yeah, that is special. We all got to learn it on our own, or have some guy yell at us and tell us what that is.
Actually, I was just having a conversation. Did an EHAC course, and they were all urban forestries for a city. And they kind of looked at me funny, but I think I convinced them. If you know basically 10 trees and 10 shrubs in your area, you are like 98% of the way there. Like, and I think 10 might even be generous. I think you could probably get away with 6, right? If you know 6 to 10 specifically, like a difference between like a red oak and a black oak, that would count those. I would count those as 2 separate trees. And you were probably 90 to 95% of the way of being able to identify pretty much anything in that area.
Especially in an urban setting, when you're an urban forester. I mean, unless you're in a very diverse urban forest, I mean, most of the time it's 6 to 10 species.
Yeah. Well, then of course they're like, well, what if you walk into an arboretum? I'm like, well, yeah, of course, but they got tags and names on the trees, so you don't need to know it.
Then you get to test yourself, right? You get to guess yourself.
And I think the one of the things that I had to learn later as an arborist, as a professional, was how to identify trees, not just by memory. Like, I didn't really understand anything about dendrology until I became a certified arborist. Like, opposing leaves and leaf patterns, that meant nothing to me. I just looked at the tree and I knew it was a maple, or I knew it was a red maple, or I knew it was an oak, or that 10 trees. And it wasn't until so if you handed me a specimen that I didn't recognize, I was not pulling out the dendrology on it and figuring, oh, it must be some type of ash because it has opposite leaf petioles. That wasn't happening.
Yeah. I remember being taught, it was Dave Leonard, actually, when I was on test committee, he used a term called BRFs, the best recognizable features. And he said every tree has at least one, some have 2 or 3. And he said, you just got to memorize the BRFs, the best recognizable features, like linden, their shape. Lindens are conical, and then their leaves, their wood texture, color, the buds. You can start narrowing it down, and you know what it is. Maples, the same thing, leaf shape, color. Then you got bark, form. Every tree has something, a best recognizable feature. It could be the fruit, could be the color, could be the. And if you learn that, sometimes you're limited because. Time of year or something. And that was always fun too, getting into dormant identification versus in leaf identification. And then with your conifers, it's cones. Can you identify them just from the cones? Because the cones are quite different as well. Obviously, they're all different. I was recently in Ontario at a show, and Kristen Moldestad from Norway her book on identifying trees by the roots, right? Which just blew my mind. It blew my mind that it blew my mind because I never thought that all the roots would be just like the twigs and just like the leaves and just like the cones, because every freaking root's different too. Well, of course it is. And it's different than the twigs. And it's so she, her whole book on tree identification by the roots was just, and no one had done it before. It's like crazy all this time and we never identified it. So, if she was in charge of the ISA certification exam, you'd be identifying the trees just by their roots.
Be painful. That'd be painful. I don't know.
They're actually quite uniquely different. It was astonishing. They look the same when you're not trained to look at it, right? It's like anything. People look at trees and go, it's just a tree. I don't know. How can you tell one from the other? Well, it doesn't take long, like Tony said, just a few things, a few key features, and you can start identifying it. But I like anything. I think you have to have a passion for it, right? You got to want to do it.
For sure. I think it starts that way, for sure.
Yeah. So how did you end up getting tree bitten or tree hooked?
So it's kind of a long kind of story, but I'll shorten it up just to say that basically I was on a wayward path during school when I was in school. Thought I wanted to thought I wanted to play college soccer. I did that for a brief second. Thought I wanted to be a civil engineer. Did that for a brief second. Inevitably failed out of school. And the whole time though, I knew I wanted to do something in the outdoors. Even when I thought I wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to be related to the outdoors. Like I wanted to work with waterways or things like that. And I had done, landscaping and had done some tree work growing up. I had worked with various things. So I had that background and that knowledge of like, I can do this for a living. So basically after I was getting out of school, I started working for a Metro Park district, and I got in as a seasonal. Quickly got hired full time, and was introduced to one of my main mentors that I consider like the guy that really got me into tree care. I was thinking of it as like a career path or a profession because he was an arborist, and that was the first time I'd ever heard of somebody being certified as an arborist, and he was the arborist for the park district. Over time, his role changed, but he still did a lot of tree work within the parks. I began working with him on various things because he was a guy that if he saw somebody that was passionate and hardworking about something, he would kind of take you under his wing if the interest was there, and he did that for me. And I worked a lot with him, and then I started getting called around to different parks within the district, starting to become quasi the tree guy because my mentor was kind of phasing out of his role, and they needed somebody else that would be more available. And even before then, I started diving into like all sorts of literature about trees and this profession and otherwise, and realizing that, hey, I think this is something I really want to do. Like, I love trees. I love the outdoors. I love running a chainsaw. I also love to climb. I'm not very good at climbing, but I love to do it. It's like one of my favorite things to do. And then, it's all these things coming together of like, what I thought I wanted to do for my life was like not really what I thought it was. And then, I'm finding myself in this other part of my profession. I'm at all at the same time. I'm becoming a father, I'm a husband, and all these things happening. And it was like this great amalgamation of things where it was like, I love trees and I love tree work, and I see and I have a goal, and I'm driven for it. Like, this is going to be what I want to do. And it took me some different moves to make it happen like full time. Because when I was working at the park district, I didn't get to just cut trees. I had to go do other things too. I had to go cut grass, and then or clean the toilets.
Yeah,
Whatever I needed to do. Right.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I also got a lot of opportunities to do that work, as well as some very cool things too on top of that. But then started my own business. Sought certification and eventually got that. Whatever training I could find myself in, I was doing. Eventually went and joined Bartlett Tree Experts the first time because I wanted to like. I basically said because I realized I was never going to get an arborist job at the parks where I wanted to be at.
Hmm.
They were phasing out the position. That was never going to happen. I was like, okay, well, if I want to do this full time and I want the real tree care experience, I need to go work for a tree care company because I never really had the balls to set my own company, and make that my primary thing. I didn't feel I could take the risk, having a little one at home and stuff. I just wanted to. If I was going to do it, it was always going to be a secondary thing.
It's interesting. Like I think a lot of people do that. Like, and then there's people that you know think or choose to just say I've got to start my own thing, versus thinking it through and actually working for someone. Is there you have any? I'm sure there's people listening that maybe are in that stage where they're wondering, do I start my own? Do I stay working? Should I work for a company? You made that decision. What's that? How would you describe that, and how's it worked out for you, like as far as career wise?
Yeah, for me, it's worked out really well. I don't wouldn't regret anything I've done, but I think it's different for everybody. And I think it all depends on your life circumstances and what you have going on. For me, it was important to have stability, right? With having an employer that I could rely upon for a steady paycheck and insurance and things like that I needed at the time. Like I said, had a baby, a wife, a home, like all these things I needed to make sure I could take care of. And for me, it was too much of a risk to just totally go fully on my own and not have the support of those things without the guarantee of like, is that work going to be there to support it?
Yeah.
But I know a lot of guys like in the Columbus area, especially, there's so many great little tree companies of guys that have just started their own thing and have now blossomed to become these awesome companies. And it took them a long time and some faster than others, but like they took that chance and they've been very successful and they're loving life. And there's times where I think like maybe I could have done that and maybe that would have been cool. Like maybe I kind of missed on that life experience. I had my own company kind of, but not in the way that these guys did.
Yeah, I like what you said about it's personal choice. I mean, obviously we all make our choices, but that there isn't, when you're in that position, when you look back, you can realize, well, hopefully you realize you made the right one.
Yeah.
But there's the circumstances, what's going on at the time. I think a lot of people, the stability is one thing, the assurance, because there's risk, right? Like in all things, but you
Yep.
calculate that risk, so to speak, in your
Right.
decision making process. Tony, you were born into it, so to speak, and then you went out, ran away with the army for a while. But how did, like, you came back into it? Like, do you relate to this kind of discussion? Like, I guess I'll talk about it after you answer the question. But I did a similar thing. But how do you relate to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because my older brother Ben
Yeah.
worked for Bartlett Tree for a long time. Worked for a couple different tree companies. Was
Right.
sort of doing what you did, Brian. Like ran the kind
Right.
of company out of the pickup truck on the weekends, and he just got to a point where he got tired of being at other people's whims, because it was very seasonal. And I don't think he liked working for the big guys to get that security very much. He didn't like working for the big three and then working for the smaller companies. So eventually just started at what I learned through him. And it's like I said, I learned that lesson is, he got to a point where he needed to decide if he was going to be a climber and a tree worker or a business owner. Because you can't really do both. If you do, you're always going to kind of limit the size of your business a little bit because you're going to have somebody that run a business. Either you're going to do it or you're going to pay somebody to do it. And, he made that decision. He decided, of course, business owner. And then, but I think it's a decision a lot of guys, and probably my brother to an extent, got into and didn't realize he's going to have to make someday. And I'm not saying that you can't be an owner operator. You definitely can. There's a lot of guys who do it, but it's going to limit the size of business growth because there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much physical effort. So if you're selling the work and running the business, you're either going to burn yourself out or your business is going to stay, and you can make a good living that way. And that's fine. I think my brother just wanted more, right? I think he wanted to build a business that would be a legacy, something that, could then, whatever happens to it in the future, it's still operating, right? 34 years in business. They're still going strong. So yeah, I think that, from my experience, I think I learned those lessons vicariously. So I never put myself in that position. I knew that I would never really want to be a business owner. I preferred just to be a tree guy. And so I've never really wanted to start my own business. It just short of, a tree company, never wanted to, and for me, business falls apart. Ownership falls apart when you got to have employees because they suck. Have an employee. But I'm just joking. They don't all suck because I'm an employee. But yeah, I think I learned that lesson kind of vicariously and through my brother. So I never had to experience it, but I could see it, having that, I never wanted to take on that amount of responsibility. I think. And I don't think that I wanted to, spend my days worrying about business. I'd rather spend my days worrying about getting tree work done.
I can relate to that for sure.
Yeah, it's yeah, there is that. Like you make a good point about uh, depending what you choose to do, because I think demographically, most of the tree companies are relatively small for that reason. It's how many tree guys that love tree work that I think is a real interesting thing with when you start to realize how much um, when you start to it takes a while when you first start climbing, you're first in the biz, you're just working, you're focused on that, and then you move up. Now you're actually delegating the work, you're getting the invoices, you're getting the work orders, and you start identifying with the volume, right? And you start, holy crap, and you start the equipment, what it costs, and you think, man, I'm only getting this, and this job was this much, I made this many dollars, and you get into that mindset. It can be really tricky, and some people, I think that's what spurns them into thinking, well, man, I did five, it's a $5,000 job. If I did 10 of those, I could almost make my wage. What the heck am I doing here? But, that's where the business comes in, and you realize profit margins and, what it takes to pay for people look at, I'll do a $500 job and that'll pay for my chainsaw because it's a $500 job. Well, no, the whole concept of margin comes in there, and that a lot of guys don't realize that. Neither they end up working for someone else again, or they become businessmen, right? And you start to realize, and you lose. It's so interesting because I have friends now that are running very successful tree companies, and they're not tree guys anymore per se. But everything they own is tree stuff, and they got a bunch of guys climbing trees, and they got a bunch of nice equipment, and they're proud of what they're doing, and they love what they do, but they're not really doing tree work anymore. And I think
You
that's why
see
a
that
lot
a
of
lot.
companies stay small, like, because if you're small, you can do your own estimates, and you reach that stage where you maintain a certain size, right? It's about growth, and um, it's interesting. What I don't know what exactly motivates. I know myself, like I left the college position, and for me it was 100% passion about helping people learn better tree care, and I wanted to spread that gospel word to me, and it was literally, I was almost evangelistic in the way I approach it, and I did not, if it wasn't for a business partner who realized there had to be, finances were important, I would have gone broke doing what I love, literally. And I think we made a great combination, but I was powered 100% on zeal. If determination, energy, and passion could have paid the bills, I was in a good position. um, but I think you can find that in a business too, right? Like as an employee, you can still, there's ways to get to that place, right, Brian? I mean, sure, you found that. I mean, how long have you been in the position you're in now?
The position I'm in now, I'm be coming up on a year this summer, so I think I'm at like 8 or 9 months right now. So
Okay.
I'm relatively new into the position I am now. But prior to that, I was in my last position for 4 to 5 years. I think
Okay.
a little over 4 years,
Yeah.
um, as a city forester, and you know, I've kind of bounced around from here to there and on different things. And when I was interviewing for the job I'm currently in now, Scott Profit, who's my boss, he asked me, he's like, or he or one of the other guys that were talking to, like, you've been around in a few different things. How do we know you're not going to bounce around to something else? I was like, well, to be honest with you, I don't know if I can answer that without saying I don't know if I will be. But the way that I've viewed my career and things in my career is like I've gone to the point to where like I feel like I'm still learning, and I'm always wanting to continue to learn and grow and do what I can to advance myself in that way. But long, long answer short is like, yeah, I'm in the career I'm in now, and I'm always just trying to learn and grow and into the next best thing. And my thing is, I always want it to be within this industry, and I want to be the best version of myself in this industry that I can be by getting all these different exposures and things that I'm doing.
Well, it's an interesting answer, a good answer, I think, because you're what I hear you saying is that when you feel like you're stopped learning or you've accomplished what like your potential in a position or where you're at, then you look for something else potentially to continue to grow yourself. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yeah, and it tends to lend itself to like where my interests are at the time of my career too. I feel like I when I was looking into this when I became a city forester, like that was something of real great interest to me at that time in my career. Was I was very interested in the how you manage this the urban forest and all those things, and I did that job, and then as I was doing that job, I was starting to get really intrigued into like some different things that are maybe more on the safety side, or maybe some more things into the training side, and I was exploring how I do that within my own job, and then opportunities I could do it outside of there, and that's kind of what led me down the path that I'm on now.
And that is more in the realm of safety and education now.
So right now I'm a regional safety manager for Bartlett Tree Experts. So my role is to manage a health and safety program within a tree care company. And biggest thing is build relationships and be a resource and help to the people that we work with day in day out. So that's the part I love most about it is getting to have that time and contact with all these great guys in the industry across a wide region and potentially have an impact with them.
Yeah, so you would go to a few different offices at on a
Yeah.
is it kind of like a cyclical basis or scheduled basis?
Yeah, so I have a lot of autonomy in my schedule, which is nice. But I cover the Midwest, so basically from Ohio out to Minnesota, and bounce around all the offices that we have, and go in there, do my safety guy thing. But our goal is to always not be the safety police. So we're there to be as helpful and be as big of a resource as we can, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit. It's been a lot of fun.
It's interesting, Tony. I guess I mean, it's similar. You do the same for your brother's company. I think would be fair to say, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah, but it's just one company, right? Not many offices. Just one.
Yeah, and I've spent quite a bit of my career doing this. Well, not exactly, but in a way where people come to learn how to do things and how to do them safely. Hopefully, we've been doing that.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
How do you feel your interactions at the different jobs and being working with trees and tree people? How do you feel that has impacted your personal life and your life, like with your family and stuff? Do you think has there been lessons either from tree people or from trees that you draw parallels to or from?
We'll say probably one thing that's helped me a lot that I draw a lot of parallels from is so I became a father at a young age, and got into management at a young age. So those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
felt
yeah.
it. Everybody was a child at one point, and everybody's at varying degrees of childishness at any given moment, and or maturity at any given moment. So I think both of those things have kind of helped one another in my career. I've learned how to deal and work with people. I've also learned how to deal and work with my family on different things. Just together in unison. I think I've learned just as much from each, and have been able to apply both of those things to each other. I think probably one of the coolest things for me now is I'm a father of three, and my kids know what I do. They know, but they kind of know. They're all old enough to know, but they still don't totally understand it. They just know I work with trees of some definition within there. And probably one of the coolest things nowadays is just seeing my kids interact with the outdoors, or now with the industry too, because they're coming more interested in things tree care related, and they want to come with me to different events and stuff like that. And they're getting more interest in that, and seeing how it shapes them as, growing up, and what interests they have and where they want to go and what they want to do. And yeah, that's been cool.
Yeah, interesting. Huh. So do you get them involved or do they?
I try to. I try
Yeah.
to whenever I can. We haven't done it in a long time because we moved this last year to a new house. We just built a house, and we don't have a ton of great trees for it. But I used to get them all tree climbing all the time, and I need to make an effort to make that happen now. Because I used to get them all up at our old house. We had a ton of great trees that were awesome for the kids to climb in. They'll still come with me. Like I do a rec climb at
Oh, yeah.
at our tree climbing competition each year. And last year they came out for it and and helped me set it up, but also helped. They got to play and swing around and stuff like that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and weirdly enough, it's not even necessarily tree care related, but I have noticed one of my oldest daughter. She has had an interest in doing first aid CPR training with me. I don't know what it is about it, but for some reason she's very intrigued by doing that training with me, and has done it with me a couple different times. Where she's like, "Are you? Oh, you're doing training? Can I come with you?" I'm like, sure, sure, yeah. You can be a little instructor, before you're even the age of 10.
Maybe she'll become a EMT or paramedic or something.
Yeah, maybe, maybe.
I can remember as a very young teenager, I would occasionally play hooky from school and go work with my dad.
Yeah.
At that point, he was doing sales, so his day was driving around talking to people. But
Oh wow.
I met Muhammad Ali once doing that. But all his clients and
Yeah.
stuff, and it was absolutely fascinating. I think that and I think back on it now, just when I try and think back, this watching the guys climb, and it was this would have been, of course, the early '80s. Just how much it's changed. So, but those were some good memories. I remember going to work with my dad and doing that, just tagging along, and it was always just kind of fun. It was fun.
Yeah.
I'll admit it was I
Exactly.
wasn't in school.
Exactly.
Anything would have been better than
Yeah.
school at that point. But the other thing too is I look back now and I realize that those memories were pretty special. Like I got to, because I always had a real good understanding of what my dad did for work.
Yeah. I'd say that's probably the thing I have up on my wife is I don't even know what my wife does for a living. So, I know where she works, but I couldn't tell you exactly how she does it or what she does. And my kids are farther away from understanding it than what I do. So if there's anything, I got that going for me. I can one up my wife by, my kids know what I do. Except it's a little bit more vague now with the whole regional safety manager thing. They're like, "What is that?"
I think the litmus test is if you're willing to do your job for free on the weekends.
Yeah,
You're probably
exactly.
pretty involved. So how many weekends have I spent doing climbing competitions? And there was a time where when my daughter was about 9, that my daughter had been to more tree climbing competitions than most of the competitors.
Yeah.
Point blank, like by far, by dozens, and stuff like that. My dog had been to more than some of the competitors. So, yeah, that's the litmus test for me. When you'll still do it on the weekend, then you probably like
exactly. Yeah, I've done countless things on the weekend for friends and family, and I don't do as much of it anymore. But I think that's one thing too that is always kind of a litmus test for me, especially when it comes to climbing. Is I think about climbing all the time, and especially tree climbing. I mean, I'm always thinking about climbing and how I can find time to go climbing. It seems like there's always a scheme in the back of my brain that's working counter to whatever productivity I need to do that says, how can you find a way to go climbing today? And it doesn't always work out, but that's always in the back of my mind, I feel like.
When my daughter was younger, she's 19 going on 31 now, but when she was 12, 13, our thing was we would go climb. I would go up and I'd set up a hammock. And then I'd set up her system. She was pretty good. Sometimes I'd belay her up and she'd just climb. But then we'd sit in the hammock up there, just chill out, and we'd eat party mix, like pretzels and cheese curls and stuff like that. And it was a blast. We had a good time doing that for a long time. We always did the fun things too. I remember once there was a white pine nest at my buddy's house and had a nest in the top of it. She's like, "What do you think's in that nest?" I'm like, "I don't know. I want to go look." She's like, "Yeah." So we climbed the tree. It was a crow nest. I knew that from the get-go, but she didn't know that. So it was always trying to find excuses. And I don't know I think those memories will impact her. But it was kind of fun sitting in the tree with a hammock and eating party mix. That was pretty cool because nobody ever, unless you're a tree guy or girl, tree person, nobody ever looks up. And I'd tell Maggie, I'd be like, "Watch, nobody ever looks up." And then when somebody looked up, I'm like, "I bet they're an arborist." Right? They're that or they're into birds. One of the two.
Which
either into trees or you're into birds.
One's maybe a little bit more athletic.
Yeah. On the topic of climbing, which is always an interesting topic, a couple of things that are bouncing around in my head. Questions. Well, first of all, what the evolution, Brian. Let's start with that. Like, if you think of the first, what was your first harness and your first climbing system? What did it look like? Do you remember?
Yeah, so I had a classic Weaver Steel D harness because that's what the guy that taught me how to climb, that's what he climbed on, and that's what he had been climbing on for years. I mean, and never graduated to anything else because that's what he knew and that's what he did. So that's what I got to learn. It had the Steel Ds, and then he had this Steel Snap spreader.
Yeah,
so it didn't pinch your boys too much. You could you could be a little bit more comfortable in it. And then he taught me on Blake's hitch and taut line, and that's the way I did it forever. And honestly, he kind of ingrained it in me so much that I became like this quasi purist, like not in a way where I was a prick to other people that did it. Like if they did it another way, I wasn't going to be a prick to them, but I would be a prick to myself if I thought about using heaven forbid, if I threw in a pulley in there to tend some friction, like it would be against my whatever belief system I had at that time. But I eventually saw the light and thought about, I don't want to work as hard and while I'm doing this and not be and I don't want to be, burn out by the time I get to where I need to be before I actually need to work. And started getting into some different things, and remember like utilizing a hitch climber for the first time and thinking about like how amazing this is, even though it's such a simple concept, like how much grander my climbing system just became by doing something like that. And continued to graduate from there, like testing out the waters on different things. I got into SRT and doing that, and I even went and dabbled outside of our industry a little bit to learn a little bit more about SRT. So I got like my Sprat certification and things like that, just because I wanted to learn more about that aspect of the world. And I'm obsessed. I love climbing. I wish I could do it every day. I don't get to do it every day, but I think one thing that's been cool now with my new role is for a while there, I was kind of like because I had moved away from working with, one of the big three, right? Or, one of these big companies. I had kind of gone out into the Wild West again of climbing, to where I could just, whatever gear I could afford to buy and made sense for me to use, I was playing around with it and using it. Right. So I was, trying new devices. I love the Rope Runner Pro and all this stuff. But what's been interesting is now that, I'm back with Bartlett, we do have some restrictions on what gear we allow and don't allow our crews to use. And it makes a lot of sense and, for why we do it. But at the same time, it's been good for me because it's brought me down a peg to be like, okay, I need to kind of refamiliarize myself with some things that I haven't used in a while. because I've just been on this journey of all these other climbing systems and things I was playing around with, and now I just got to kind of bring myself back to center on some of these things.
Well, that was going to be my second question was how, like, I know that Bartlett has a protocol, and what, just a quick, that this is the third question, but when we say big three, we'll just quickly divert for just 1 second here. What I think we're talking, I know we're talking Davy Bartlett, but
Yeah.
I wonder if the big three are the same for everyone. Like, are you talking Davy Bartlett Asplund? Is that the big three, or is
The
it
I would my initial thought is Asplund in there, but then the other part of my brain says, well, that doesn't make sense because they're utility vegetation management and
right?
not, I mean, and then you could argue, well, Davy has this arm of the
Yeah,
utility vegetation, but yeah, I'd usually probably throw Asplund in there
yeah.
or Save a Tree would be the other one, just because
Okay,
you see
okay.
Save a Tree everywhere,
Okay.
you
Yeah,
know.
and I think the third could be a little fluctuating for exactly the reasons you
Uh,
mentioned. When it comes to residential, I think we definitely have to agree there's the two, right? There's Davy
yeah,
and Bartlett certainly have that category locked up, but Aspen's residential is far less, they have some areas where they do quite a bit, but it's not as a general rule like Davy and Bartlett.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, getting back to the uh, the climbing systems when and I was exposed as I've done consultant work with Bartlett and Davy, and they're in a position where they have to, you got so many people and so many options, and there's so much diversification and development. You just, as from a liability perspective and as a company, you got to know what your guys are using out there, and there has to be some
yeah,
process of approval and vetting. And without giving away any trade secrets, how and being new to your position, I guess I have a
yeah.
bonus question there. How have you found that process? And you alluded to it already, but and then what options are available to Bartlett climbers, for example?
Yeah. I mean, they're not so limited that that they're just in the Stone Age. I think that's where and even that's even been pretty recent that that's occurred because I know the first time I worked with Bartlett, they were, I don't think we were really doing much with SRT at all, but now we are. Um, but you know, they're restricted enough to where, like what you just described, we have a baseline and a knowledge of what they're using and what of the potential risks and hazards associated with those are, and we've reduced it down to make it simple. Basically, we have this is an option, this is an option, this is an option, and it still gives people the freedom of choice, but within our controls, right? And with all the devices and everything that we have that's available to them, they can do all the types of climbing that they want to do. I think what most of the time comes up that when I go to different offices and when you got guys trying to do different things or asking about doing different things, it's not necessarily some of the climbing hitches and stuff like that. It ends up being more of, I want to use this weird configuration of a carabiner and a pulley for my canopy anchor, or I want to do this
Ah,
configuration of something along those lines. It's always, at least that's more of my experience, is
right.
it's always like we want to make some weird configuration that they saw on Instagram or something, and or they use this at home, quote unquote. That's their safe word of like, I don't use this at work, I use it at home.
All
But
right.
it's like, I'm sure as soon as I leave here, you're probably using it. Um, there's always like they're looking for like what little things can we do to tweak stuff. Because like I
Yeah.
said, I think we have enough stuff available to the guys that there's not just a consistent flow of people asking for new things or wanting to new. They're always trying to tweak it a little bit. Um, And sometimes it's good or bad. Sometimes people come up with things that we never thought of, and it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. We could definitely do that. And I think we have a great process for how we figure that out. So I basically work with a team of regional safety managers, and we have a voting committee on equipment and gear and how we do things. And we all just kind of come together when something gets proposed to us, and we figure it out, talk about it, figure it out, we vote on it, and we go from there. And it usually works pretty well. Sometimes people are disappointed with choices on gear they wanted to try out, but other times people are totally understanding. I think it comes down to the culture. In a lot of the places, we have a pretty good culture of understanding of why we're doing what we do and why decisions are made. So,
is there like, can you explain a bit of the process of how, like, let's say, some climber within the organization and some office really feels he's got a configuration, we'll call it, some
mhm.
deviation from the norm that really improves things. And is there a way for him to bring that through? Like, would he start with you, and then if you felt or agreed, you'd bring it forward, or like, do you have a
Yeah,
system for that, or how does that work?
it happens differently almost every time, but in general, you generally have like some talented guy in an office somewhere who may bring it up to one of his leaders in his office. So, like, I work really closely with all the safety coordinators that are within each office. And so they're kind of my direct line to the office, as well as the managers and other
Ah, yeah,
people.
yeah.
So, there's some good climber who's got this cool idea, or he's wanting to try this piece of kit that he's been, that he found something, and they bring that to whoever in the office, and then that gets relayed to somebody like myself. Maybe we have a team regionally that's looking at that. Like, maybe we have a trainer in that region that is also able to take a look at what they're doing and can kind of vet it and see if it's
Okay.
worthwhile. Maybe there's some other skilled climbers in the area that potentially might be able to vet what the guy's doing and take a look and see if it's worthwhile looking into. And then we maybe just expand it from there. Like, it kind of becomes like a wider and wider net process as we
Right.
as we get as we get further up the food chain. Is like, okay, we have our little group in this area that thinks this is okay and cool, and then we kind of expand from there and take it to a more broader level of people who are looking across the country as to whether or not maybe this would be a good idea for us or not. Or is it going to be too much of a risk with this application?
Right.
Or is there too much risk of people manipulating it and doing something we don't want them to do with it?
Right.
Um, yeah,
It's a pretty sticky wicket, so to speak, right? Because
yeah,
it's the old adage of who's going to come up here and check my cuts for a proper pruning cut.
right,
Who's really looking the way I've configured my tie-in point at this particular junction, and can they even see it? And who's going to check it, and if it's working, and then how much. The funny thing about it is all of this stuff is, if it really comes an issue when something happens, something bad,
right,
then,
right,
even if that particular kit or configuration may not have been a direct contributor, or even a contributor at all, but it was in the system, and now it's being looked at with other eyes besides,
yeah,
not just your company investigating it, but
right,
potentially a government, person or something. That's where the real challenge comes in. And you can't really, you don't want to, if you try to stifle it, it's almost impossible, right? Because, it's like this whole thing when you guys were talking about, um, riding with your dad, Tony, and doing estimates. Like, it's such a interesting business, where you're dealing with living things, and you've got generally a younger uh, group that's doing the work with a couple older people, helping or leading, bringing the mature mind. You got the young, the strong minds, or the strong backs, and the strong minds, not necessarily being the same person. And then you've got someone else that's actually looking at it. Usually, an owner that's part of things, but in a different way. Sometimes they're doing the estimates, but it's such a team layered thing. By the time the customer actually has the job done, they may have seen they've talked to someone on the phone, they've met somebody, they've met a crew. There's a lot of different interactions that take place, And in that whole process, like how do you, when you're running a business, keeping track of all that, or trying to be in control, or at least demonstrating due diligence? It's a complex organism. And I think that that's one of the things that guys don't realize, getting back to starting your business, right? And then growing it and then saying, well, man, we could expand, have a crew. Whoa. Suddenly you realize, oh yeah. I think of Kevin Bingham when he first showed us the rope wrench, and
Yeah.
it was just a setup of stuff. It wasn't a wrench at all. And
Yeah.
we were in Chicago, and he was going to use it. He wanted to use it for the work climb. And, there was Mark Bridge, myself, Scott Profit, Bruce Smith, Andrew Horday, Tony. Were you in that when he had it hung up in the tree there? You were there.
Yeah, because I would have been the head tech at the
Yeah.
work climb
And
here.
we're like, what the heck? And then we got it. Like, he had thought it through and it made sense. But even Kevin had to go through a major learning curve over the next few years of is this thing going to really be implemented, which is all along the stuff we're talking about, right? And
Right.
there was a major controversy around all that, but
Yeah.
people stood their ground for the right reasons. I remember Mark Bridge made a shirt for the ITCC committee that we're not here to make friends,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but because it was around all these concerns about what if something happens and someone's using
Right.
this, and then can everybody use it, and should we allow it? And all of a sudden it's going to be like, it's like a little wildfire,
Exactly.
and that's managing, and you live that really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Each and every day.
And who wants to be the guy that discourage someone about the next rope wrench invention? Like, look what it's done in the industry, and it's a huge thing, and I don't think anybody does. I really don't. I think most people, if they're in this job like you talked about, where you're doing it on the weekends and you're dreaming of climbing, like, the last thing you want to do is stifle someone's innovation, and you might even try it yourself, right? But at the same time, balance safety and into all that. And Tony, do you guys have a system like that within your company? Like, how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, it pretty much centers around me. Because I'm only dealing with a couple crews, so pretty much we'll get the guys and girls whatever gear they want to climb within reason, based on how long they've been with the company and their
Right.
their experience level. There are certain things that we won't get for them if it's not labeled and doesn't have manufacturer's instructions. Because it's work, right? That's at a minimum. So if it doesn't have if it's not properly rated, and marked as such, and then comes with complete manufacturer's instructions for use, retirement, maintenance, those things. And there are things out there that you can buy in the major catalogs right now that do not have those two things that people are using a lot of. I just from a professional standpoint, I tell guys, I'm like, what you do in your backyard, that's fine. And I'm not saying that this piece of equipment is unsafe. What I'm saying is it doesn't meet industry standards, and we work here. This is, if something were to happen and this was involved, then we would all have some questions to answer. So no, it kind of revolves around me. If somebody comes up with something new and different, I'll take a look at it. And then I sort of do exactly what Brian does, except my network is not in one company. It's all over the world. The trainers and the people I know, and I say, hey, check this out. And occasionally we'll get things load tested, relationships with manufacturers, we'll have different knots or different configurations. So yeah, it revolves around that. Like I said, I'm with Brian. It usually ends up being more weird variations of a theme than any brand new or something that's, it's like just taking the wheel and painting a different color, which is fine. I think what a lot of people miss in that process is how repeatable is it, right? Because I've run into doing training in the Pacific Northwest, and I run into guys and I'll use these canopy anchoring systems for stationary rope systems, and they work great in a single stem Doug fir tree. You put that thing in a wide spreading oak and something's going to go terribly wrong because it just loads differently. So how repeatable is it? And I think when I get, and I saw this mostly with the ITCC and climbing competitions, is a lot of climbers come in, newer climbers, they don't understand that we've made a lot of these mistakes before, and so when we look at something and say, no, we're just not going to it's not because we don't want to, it's because we've seen this mistake before. We've been down this road before. Like, Dwayne, you can remember when we were footlocking, and I think was it Rip that jammed the prusik up into the spread of the rope, and he basically fell. Like, because the prusik just didn't hold on. Like, we've
Well,
been
and
down
not
this
only did
road,
we do that, we actually would demo it. Like, I think back because we wanted, it's a powerful demo, and we did it quite a bit, and it was scary. And we realized, like, what the heck are we doing? Like, something could happen, and we would have a belay on, thank goodness. But in addition to the prusik. But yeah, just to show, it's a pretty impressive thing when you jam a prusik up into an 8-inch spread over a limb, and you drop it, act like it needs to grab you. It'll drop 10, 15 feet before it grabs, and you go for a pretty good. Not only does it look impressive, it feels. Rip was very happy when we all were when we stopped. It was funny. Ken never ever volunteered to do it. It was always Rip
Yeah.
or I or Sean or Rip did more of it than anybody. Rip did it a lot.
I think, after 5, 6 years of training, when I learned that people will remember the things you do poorly well more than the things you do right, I'd learned not to show people the wrong way.
But I hope that I'm really glad we got on this. We haven't talked about this particular topic in the climbing realms yet that I recall. As far as, it just seems like I hope, and I guess I'm going to use the word younger climbers because it seems like there's this frustration, between you guys are old, there's that shirt, do you even climb? That guys walk around all cock of the walk. It's like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? I was climbing before you were born, right? Maybe I'm not production climbing now, but like, really? You're gonna throw that, dude? It's just weird, and it's like, I don't know what's happened, but it's like, just because someone's 60 or 65 and don't compete anymore, holy crap, like there's a lot of information there, and I don't know, is that a trend or is that, because it seems like that's where, and then they get upset, and it's like, oh, you guys just don't want to do it, you just want to make everyone climb the hard way and do like that was happening to us on ITCC committee, and it's like, no, it's about, the old, I get back to the human forest. Like the young trees aren't busting the balls of the old trees. Why do we do that as humans? Where does that come from? Yeah.
Yeah.
But what do you think? What do you think? How do you find that happens, or do you weed them out before they get there, Brian, in the company?
Yeah. So there's always dissenters. I think that's just true with no matter what. There's always the guy who's not going to be 100% happy with what's going on. And I think for the most part, most of our offices, at least in the region that I cover, we have some pretty good teams that where we've either just weeded out those over time that were the dissenters that, we're just never going to buy in to what we're selling type of thing. They were always going to be the lone wolf that wanted to do his own thing and didn't like what the big guy had to say type of issue.
Yeah.
But I've seen that in other areas too, like you guys talking about tree climbing competitions and and other trainings and stuff I've been to. It's like I don't know if it's as much of a like disdain for like the older generation or anything like that. I don't think that's the case, at least in the experiences I've had. I just think it kind of goes back to like what Tony said about like the recognition that they've been there and done that before, that these guys have done it before. And I think sometimes that's what's forgotten about a lot of the times is they think because, oh, I'm doing SRT and I'm on this piece of kit and I'm, XYZ, like you've never seen this or done this before. But it's in reality, when you break it down, it's like they probably have and then some. And they've probably been on all these things ahead of leading you up to where you're at right now. You may have been able to watch a few YouTube videos and got a little bit further ahead than they were at their age. But now, I mean, everything you've learned has probably been testament to not maybe that guy directly, but somebody somewhere who's helped build
Yeah.
what we're all doing now.
Yeah.
And I think people are quick to forget that, especially with the way technology has allowed us to get access to information so quickly. Like everybody knows way more than they ever did before
Yeah.
at a younger
Yeah.
age.
That's true.
And
Definitely.
it kind of makes people take that for granted and forget that there's a lot that goes into all that knowledge gathering and a lot of time and effort.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
just
No,
to
that's
kind
a good
of
point.
bring it back full circle to like the gear stuff, like when you talk about all these guys that just they're wanting to do little tweaks or configurations. I think Tony, you kind of alluded to it, is like, well, we already have something that does the same thing. Like you just painting it a different color, like you said, Tony. Like I think
Yeah.
that's one of the main questions I end up asking these guys is like, well, what are we to gain from this? What we already have X, Y, or Z that does the same thing or does something very similar. Like, is this
Yeah.
really worth the potential risk of us trying something new and seeing how it goes, or are we just happy with what we have? And remembering that we people have made mistakes before to get us to where we have now.
Yeah. And I think, like the human forest analogy, again, the big trees are connected to the little trees
Yeah,
via the roots and they do share resources. And maybe that's something that us old trees need to remember too. Like you got to forge those relationships
yeah,
and, to just enforce rules at the time that that's necessary or policy, what about the other things, as far as how you doing, pats in the back, just talking about the weekend stuff too, like keeping that there's an obligation there too, because the whole adage that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. That's also a big part of things too, right? Where you're going to get you want respect, you got to give respect too, right? And I think that sometimes needs to be remembered by the older guard to a certain extent, right?
yeah. It goes both ways. I mean, relationships are probably more or less, you could argue, 95 to 99% of what I do, right?
Right.
See all the management, all the other things. That's that's important and it has its place and it has its role, but it's all about the relationships that I build with these guys, whether it's the production guy or the manager or whoever that I'm working with. And that's, to me, I think another reason why I love this industry is because I've found it so easy to build relationships with these people. Like I find an easy connection with everybody in this industry, at least most people. There's again,
Right.
same thing. There's always the dissenters. But
Right.
that's like the small few. I feel like I can go anywhere where there's tree people around and I have a home. I have a place to be a part of and can relate to these guys, no matter what age they are either. At least that's been like my feeling is like even from a young age, like I can relate to older people just as well as I can relate to younger people. You know, and maybe that's just the way I was brought up and makes me a little different. Um, but yeah, it's relationships mean so much, and nothing is going to work unless you have a good relationship there.
And and then there's so much about the human condition that's connected, and you don't know, I can think of people that I had a student that was a dissenter, as you call them, definitely. And, you know, years later, he came to me and, unbeknownst to me, and he apologized for some of his actions that he did. And, to his credit, and he didn't need to. It wasn't like it offended me or hurt me, but he was definitely a dissenter, to say the least. But what was going on, and I found out later. He was going through a divorce. And that's the other thing is there. If typically a lot of these dissenters, as we'll call them, that's often a byproduct of something else that's going on, right? And about so have forming the relationship not that it's all part of our business. And I think that's a real fine line. That's a whole
Yeah,
nother topic, right? But like, man, like how are things going, man? And like really, we're not counselors and we're not there to take care of the home life, but like if something going on there you don't know about, it will come into the
Yeah.
workplace, right? And there's that connection, and relationships are how you can, navigate that. But that's probably a course in and of itself. Tony, you talk a bit about that, right? Like how to manage that, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the, defining lessons of my life was, learning that everybody has a story, right? Everybody's going through
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
And it's going to affect how they react to you. It's going to affect how they react to the world. And then just
yeah,
understanding that, and it's, as a leader and a manager, there's times where it's a hard no. It's like, nope, ain't happening. Right. Like it just can't, but there's other times where it can be like, okay, we need to address this, but now might not be the time, you know, and to understand that everybody, is going through something. Everybody has a story. And when you can get that, then building those relationships become easier, I
yeah.
think. And it's true for me too. I've gone out and looked at crews and have just picked them apart, but it had more to do with me than it did with
Right,
them,
right, right.
because I was having my own issues too. So
Good point.
Empathy and self awareness are such important skills for everybody to learn. And I think that, Tony, you hinted on timing too. I think timing is important within that as well. I think so many of us have poor timing when we deal with our emotions and when we are trying to understand situations, and just understanding that maybe how you're feeling right now does not mean you need to respond right now. And you might need to take a minute and respond a little bit later to what's going
Yeah,
on.
check
Um,
yourself before you wreck yourself.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
well, I think there's even lessons from trees, right? Like in nature,
Yeah.
everything happens, but not in a
Right.
rush.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
happens,
Yep.
and I think
Yep.
you're right, Brian. One of two things happens: either you tend to have those conversations too fast, or you never have them,
Right.
right?
Yep.
But there's usually a happy medium in there somewhere too, right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's a skill in and of itself. I think that's something that sometimes I struggle with, was like that timing of, you know, making sure it does happen. Even if maybe now might be the right time and you make the right choice to not do it at that time, still making sure it happens at some point. It's that's tough to do
Yeah, no, definitely.
because usually those aren't fun conversations.
Recognizing where we've made mistakes and promptly admitting it and recognizing it, is uh, uh, a discipline that requires action, and it's important.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
what I found, and like it seems this part of the conversation seems a bit esoteric, but I think it's directly relatable to leadership, which is directly relatable to safety
Yeah.
in this industry. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of people in this industry in a leadership position that lead the way they learned, which was sort of the brute force and stupidity method. And
Yeah.
I think that people coming up in this industry, the dissenters, as you so rightfully call them, they'll just rebel against that and get themselves into some
Yeah.
pretty crappy situations where if they had
Yeah.
experienced better leadership, more, so shall we say, evolved leaders, then it could be handled
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So many people, the usual trajectory in this industry is you do that really well. Guess
Yeah,
you're a
yeah,
manager
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Well, it's the old Peter principle. You get promoted to your highest level of incompetence, right? When you finally get
Yeah.
promoted to a
Exactly.
job you suck at, you no longer get
Yeah.
promoted anymore, and there you stay.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
we're nearing that magic mark, and I think it's a nice segue. I almost want to honor the topic with not watering it down, because I think this is a really good. Came to a really cool place here, and that those are the really powerful statements in the last 5-10 minutes that are and conversation. I think that's really worth pondering, and um, I want to thank you, Brian, for taking us on this journey, and we ended up in a pretty cool. Our little creek became a bit of a river, and we ended up in a pretty cool pond here at the end. And I
Yeah.
want to thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. You guys made it easy. And yeah, I could talk about this stuff all day. So I love it. This is what I mean. Great minds all coming together. We found a home where it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So
everyone
it's
says
always
that.
great. It's always interesting listening to them. So take the time and check yours out. It'll be coming out later in the year, but usually we'll send a little reminder to you, or just check the tree actions, and all of a sudden, with your heart racing a little bit, you say, "Oh crap, I'm up! There I am!" and put it on the radio.